Hey there, Sheryl here. Today is an extremely special day because it is not that often that I have the honor of interviewing a friend, but also someone who has been so impactful in the workplace, for such a long time. Amy Bunszel, welcome, and I am so glad that you're here.
Oh, thank you, Sheryl. I'm happy to be here.
So Amy and I have known each other not to date ourselves, but since our 20-somethings were, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old on the playground. So it's been amazing to follow your career journey. And before we get started, I really want to honor all of the success that you have and continue to see at Autodesk.
Oh, thank you. It's also been great for me to see how you've evolved your career over the same time period as well.
Yes, it's been pretty fast and furious, that's for sure. And I also want to mention that you can probably see, but Amy is Executive Vice President of Engineering Design Solutions at Autodesk. And before we jump in and get started with some gems of wisdom that you are going to share, that I am so excited, but can you tell us where your journey got started? In other words, a little bit about your story, why you got started, how you got started at, Cornell or earlier, and what kept you going as a woman in technology? Because it's certainly not a cakewalk or not super easy right now, but I can only imagine that when you got started, you were probably pretty used to being the only.
Yes, that is true. So I am, in high school, I had a guidance counselor who knew I was good at math and science and suggested I go into engineering. And I thought that was a great idea. I didn't really know what it entailed, but it turned out to be a great fit for me. So I studied electrical engineering at Cornell. And while I was there, I think more than anything, I learned a lot about time management, critical thinking, problem solving, skills that really have served me well over the years. I didn't work as an electrical engineer for very long. I did that job for about 2 years and realized pretty quickly that being in the lab and designing hardware, I worked for a defense contractor, wasn't really what gave me passion, what I felt passionate about. Instead, I liked working with the people. So I quickly gravitated over to roles where I was kind of managing programs and supporting engineers in using different kinds of software and getting their outcomes. And so one thing I often share is that the first 10 years of my career, I didn't have a plan. I mean, looking back, it makes a lot of sense, but going forward, every couple of years I would change jobs, mostly because I got bored, a couple times because I got laid off or the company closed down. But during each of those positions, I learned something about myself and what I liked to do and what I didn't like to do. And so I ended up, finally ending up working in software and being a sales applications engineer. So it was a great job because I got to go talk to all the customers and try to figure out how to use our software to solve their problems. Then in 1996, I started a company with some people I was working with, and we got acquired by Autodesk after running the company for about 9 years. And so in 2003, I joined Autodesk. It was, for me, a great point in my career to work in a bigger organization and be able to take advantage of a lot of the leadership development and other great people that worked there. So, and even at Autodesk, I kept growing and changing and taking on different roles as well.
Yeah, and I want to highlight something that you said that's really important, especially for emerging leaders, that you didn't graduate from college and have a straight trajectory of success from A to B or from A to where you are now. There were some twists and turns in the road, and it was just a matter of discovering what you were passionate about, and that is absolutely okay. And also to also understand sometimes you have to have those those first jobs and positions, and just to really understand what you like and what you don't like. And
I often talk to young people who think that have a lot of anxiety about getting the perfect first job. And really it's get a first job and then, grow and learn from there and be excited about what you can learn. Even if what you learn is that was not a good job for you, that's still a huge accomplishment and a great, piece of feedback that you can then use to get the next role and think about what might be more fulfilling for you.
Yeah, and clearly it's not going to hold you back from being executive vice president.
No, and to some extent, I think it's the diverse experiences that I had outside of Autodesk and then within Autodesk that put me in a good position to do my role today.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. And I want to ask you a couple questions because I know about Autodesk that they've been very proactive. And one thing that I've been hearing lately on either being on D&I panels or coaching executives in this space is that there's an increased level of awareness now, but not everybody is super happy with the progress. And it seems like Autodesk is really being proactive here. Can you share what Autodesk is doing to create a more diverse workplace?
Absolutely. So, I think like many of our peer companies, we believe that not only is it the right thing to do to create a more diverse workplace, but there's so much data and research out there showing that it's also a business imperative. I pulled up some studies from Fortune, Great Place to Work, and Gallup, and companies who are committed to D&I, they see 24% higher year-over-year revenue growth. Companies with inclusive cultures, and I think culture is really important, and we should come back and talk about that. They're 6 times more likely to be agile and innovative. And inclusive cultures have 22% less turnover, thanks to increased morale, opportunity, and equity. So we looked at, we benchmarked against a lot of companies, and we looked to see, what were things that Autodesk, where were we falling behind, where do we need to catch up, and where were we doing fairly well. I will say one area where we're doing fairly well is on our board. Our board is, I think it's 50-50 men and women. We have a fairly new board member who is a Black woman from Georgia Tech, who's about to become the Dean of Engineering and Architecture at the Ohio State University. So we definitely started at the top of the company. The CEO staff is quite diverse. But when we looked at the whole company, we saw really that for women, both in tech and in sales, we had some work to do. So in terms of solving that problem, you can solve it partially by hiring. And so, we've definitely got programs in place so that we get a diverse slate of candidates whenever we're hiring for roles. We also are starting to look at our intern program and our early career hiring and making sure that we're going to the historically Black colleges and universities and other schools that have a good diverse population for the roles that we're hiring. So those have been really important initiatives. But the one that I'm most excited about is we're investing a lot in belonging. So, it's one thing to try to solve the problem, by hiring people from some of these diverse backgrounds, but you also have to look at your current population and see if you have a leaky bucket, is how I think about it. You're putting a lot of people in, but if you're losing more than you're adding, you're never gonna get ahead. So we look at, attrition across the different populations within the company and try to understand, are we losing, women faster than we're losing men? We look at our engagement survey where we measure feelings of belonging and inclusion, and we want to make sure that everyone in the company is having a good experience. But we also want to look to see, are there teams or locations where we see discontinuities there and invest there. So as a result of some of that, we're doing something called a belonging sprint. So as part of our culture programs, about twice a year, we have a pretty big company-wide effort where we focus on one area of our culture. And we are all, as a company, having lots of different development opportunities right now around belonging, because if it's different to feel included than it is to be included versus to feel like you really belong. And we want all our employees to, feel heard and feel like, they belong at the company and can really have a big impact at Autodesk.
And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because diversity is an important piece of the puzzle, but it's certainly not the only piece of the puzzle, and inclusivity is huge. And so I love that, the way that you're explaining the belonging sprint to focus on different populations. And also that way too, that it seems like other diverse populations can also help whatever diverse population that the focus is on at that given moment, and that it eventually all comes around. And that is just so important. So I really want to honor you guys for doing that and really setting the stage, because we're going to talk also about today of how to transform business during disruptive times. And this is really a great springboard to that, because, from a personal development perspective or a high performance perspective, and if I look at the last 40 years of human performance research, if we can get people to be intrinsically motivated and tap into that, then that's when magic happens. That's when mountains are moved. And so I would think, and it's also the research is coming out, that if we can really connect with people, not just to have have a more diverse workplace, but also to make them feel included and allow them to tap into not just what they deserve, but also how they can leave the workplace, maybe even, for the next generation, something bigger than themselves. That can be incredibly powerful. And I think is going to be super vital, especially after coming off the year that we've had of disruption and going into, another year that, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but we're not there yet. So it's those intrinsic motivators that you're really firing up at Autodesk that is probably, at least in addition to amazing products, part of the success puzzle that you guys had, during a crazy year when a lot of companies have been struggling.
It's an interesting point about the intrinsic motivation. One of the reasons why I've stayed at Autodesk for so long is because of what our customers do. I mean, if something is built in the world, chances are an Autodesk customer was involved in it in some way. And if I think about a lot of the challenges that society faces, and if we look at just some of the disruptions we've had with water and infrastructure in the last few months, and climate change, there's a lot of work that Autodesk customers are doing to try and solve some of these problems. And for our employees, knowing that the work they're doing is enabling our customers to really imagine a whole new possible is really rewarding for them.
Yeah, and I think even combined with that by Autodesk saying we see you and we value you for who you are.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, that's just when magic happens. So I wish you all that continued success and for doing all those things right. Now, going forward into, despite this, I imagine that everything wasn't easy, in the prior year, and you probably have some big demands and challenges laying ahead. So what is, a way that, can you share any tips or strategies for really transforming business during a time of really immense disruption?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey over the last 12 months, that's for sure. So a couple things come to mind. I think we've all probably read the articles that talk about, having boundaries and how you manage your workday, taking time to recharge, whether it's going for a walk or exercising. But the ones I want to focus on are actually things that we help support our employees directly and indirectly. A couple of things we did was we've had over a half a dozen one-time company holidays. Like whenever we felt that the stress was just really building up, we would really take a look at the calendar and pick a few days that would just tell people, the whole company took off. And in my entire career, like the entire company being off on the same day is pretty amazing in terms of being able to recharge. And so people really appreciated that. And then we also started changing some of our wellness programs and giving people more opportunities to use some benefits more flexibly. Again, so whether they wanted to support their, physical health, emotional health, do hobbies, that kind of gave them another outlet. But I think most importantly, what we did a lot of is we over communicated nonstop. What happened maybe once a month was happening once a week, really to reach out to employees to let them know that as leaders, we were, paying attention to what was happening internally and externally. As a leader, having to comment on a lot of the just unprecedented unrest that happened around the world, independent of the virus. So it was kind of an always on for us. But in return, gosh, the teams were so appreciative that we really were paying attention to the things that were impacting, their ability to feel good about what they were doing.
Yeah, and I just really want to honor you for doing that, because a lot of times those conversations are uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
They're not fun to have, and it's a lot easier not to have them, quite frankly. But I think you're really seeing the payoff when it comes to loyalty and your colleagues, their ability to be sustainable high performers, because there is something that I was reading about called emotional tax. And a lot of times that we don't understand what others are dealing with. And in particular, if you're in a group that's marginalized, we haven't been in their shoes. So we might not understand exactly what they're experiencing, especially during these incredible times of, turmoil and grief and all the things that happened last year. So again, making people feel seen and heard is so important. And so thank you for bringing that up. Now, I have a question. I have to ask you a question about mindset just to tie us together, being the mental toughness and high performance coach. And so what mindset has really either allowed you or, kept you going being a women in technology for the last, we're the same age, so I'm not going to say how long because I don't want to give it away. But for the last while, what mindset has kept you going, and what can you share that'll probably serve, emerging leaders?
So I would say for me, a couple things. If I look back on my career, there were a couple of, I think, transformative moments where I had to decide what kind of leader I wanted to be. I think the first point was when I became, the first time I was a people manager, which is an interesting transition. You often go from, having a group of peers to then having them all report to you in some cases. And so thinking about, how I was going to lead and manage people and create a good environment where people could do their best work was something I was very intentional about. And then I am every time I end up leading a new team or building a team. And then the other was when the first time I went from managing a domain, and I was a product manager, so moving from product management to manage the whole development organization, and really to think about how I can't do and have never done the work of most of the people on my team. So how can I add value to what they're doing, without getting into the micromanaging and being, quite frankly, unhelpful, because I'm not the best person to make those decisions or think about those aspects of the project. So those were points where I really had to evolve my leadership style. But the big theme throughout the whole thing was, what was I doing to enable others? That's one of the things that motivates me. And I think for any leader emerging, and I'm still emerging, I think, in many ways, is to think about, like, what's your North Star and what really motivates you, and try to stay true to that as you navigate through your career, because there'll be twists and turns along the way, but knowing what really is in your heart about things is good.
Yeah, that's good to know. What it seems like you're saying too, that it's important to be a little bit vulnerable, especially when you start managing teams and teams of experts, that honestly will help you to be great, and you need to give them some autonomy to do so. But that does take some vulnerability in raising your hand and saying, I do have a blind spot here.
Mm-hmm.
And I am not an expert in everything. So maybe some vulnerability has really served you along the way, and then really feeling, taking the time and space to evaluate what type of leader you are, and to really build the courage to stay true to that, because that'll probably guide you through your career path.
Absolutely.
So if you were to leave the listeners with a couple gems of wisdom, what would you advise them, especially as at the time as we're recording this, we're in March of 2021. So we're in year 2 of the pandemic. Like I said, there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel. We're certainly not out of the woods. So when it comes to transforming business during disruptive times, what would you leave people now as they look into the future?
Well, the one thing that's on my mind a lot is, how do we, as we think about going back to our offices someday, maybe in the not so distant future, how do we think, what do we want out of that environment? I think we've learned a lot over the last 12 months that a lot of people can be really effective working from home. But I think many of us are missing the human connection and some of the spark and collaboration and innovation that comes from that. So what I'm thinking about is, how can we ensure kind of the right amount of flexibility, so that people who want to spend more time in the office can, people who need to come in for collaboration periods can, but we don't sort of just by default go back to the old way of doing things just because they're available again. I think our employees, and I know I myself personally, have appreciated, getting a couple hours of my day back from not having to commute to San Francisco all the time. But I know I also want to go, into the office and interact with my colleagues. So that's a long way of saying I don't think we have all the answers for what the workplace is going to be like when we go back, but we want, great outcomes for our employees, and we want to, work with everybody to create a good, flexible environment there.
Yeah, and do you think that, are you speaking to senior leaders who are making these decisions, or do you think it's important for, emerging leaders and everyone else to have a voice as to how they could possibly work most effectively?
I absolutely, that I'll add to that making sure that the people around you and your leadership kind of knows sort of maybe what I just had a career conversation with someone the other day about this. If you're in a mode like where you can be 200%, make sure that your company, your team knows that and can take advantage of you. If you're in a phase where you can be 95%, that's okay too, but make sure that you're having good dialogues with your manager or whoever's assigning your work around that, so that everybody can be doing their best based on what's going on. I mean, I think we learned that in this whole experience, that we're always a blend of work and home, even if we're working from the office or not. And so I feel there's a lot more empathy and understanding, and also people are doing great work because they have a lot of flexibility and they can make the choices that they need to. So yeah, the other thing I would add is that don't be shy about what you're interested in doing in the future. I think that's a great thing to think about. You don't have to have a roadmap of your whole career, but thinking about what next skill you want to learn, or what next type of opportunity you might want, or what other jobs look interesting to you. Having those conversations with, whether it's a coach or a mentor or your manager, can be really fulfilling in that it just lets people know, hey, you're open and you're interested in something different should it come along.
Yeah, and I really highlight that as well, because as we know, there's a lot of studies out there that say actually men are more likely to do that, even if they're not qualified. Not qualified, I should say, not qualified yet, which is great, because you don't need to be qualified. You can show some interest and then, learn. And then, and women tend to be, not to make this generalization, but the research is there to prove it, is that women, they need all the boxes checked. And so what I'm hearing is you do not need all the boxes checked. If something is interesting and you're passionate about it or curious about it, raise your hand, start talking about it, start applying for things, and just really go after it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think curious is everybody should be curious, because it's I think it's a way that you can figure out how to grow, right? Because if you just stay in your comfort zone and do what you already are expert at, you're not going to grow and develop. So I think that curiosity and a little bit of risk taking really helps a lot of people thrive.
Yeah, and I just want to add one small thing to that, is that as human beings, we're creatures of comfort, and we might put our toe outside into that outside of our comfort zone. But a lot of times it's very important to align ourselves with someone, like you said, whether it's a coach or a mentor or a colleague or something that's really going to push you and really going to tell you to go for it. Because, and I know it certainly happened to me, because us coaches have coaches too, but sometimes we just need a little, nudge or a big kick in the where to just take off, to say, I believe in you, got this, you can do this. Because a lot of times people that have achieved certain levels of success, someone believed in them before they believed in themselves. So that was so valuable what you just shared. So Amy, thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. Keep up all of your amazing work. I look forward to things getting back to normal. So hopefully we can get together at some point soon. And here's to your continued success.
Thank you.